You ever notice that the most intelligent people in a room never seem to care about what anyone thinks? It's not arrogance, it's not coldness, it's not even confidence in the usual sense, it's something far deeper, far quieter, far more powerful. While most people are running in circles, constantly seeking approval, validation, or a sign that they're doing it right, intelligent people operate on a different frequency entirely. They notice how much mental energy is wasted trying to fit in, trying to measure up, trying to keep others comfortable while suppressing themselves. And the more they notice, the less they can ignore it. Think about it. Every conversation becomes a test. Every interaction requires calculation. Every decision is weighed not just by its merit, but by how it will be received. Most people don't even realize they're doing it, but the mind is clever. It's constantly scanning the environment, predicting reactions, measuring acceptance. It's exhausting and it fractures clarity. Intelligence, on the other hand, craves clarity. It can't tolerate noise or compromise. Highly intelligent people quickly realize that the moment they tie their worth to approval, they lose control over their lives. They begin to see approval for what it truly is, a temporary, unstable, and often misleading currency, one that can vanish at any moment, leaving you depleted, unsure, and disconnected from yourself. And when they see this, something begins to shift almost imperceptibly at first. The internal compass that was always present starts to take over. The voice inside that knows what's true, what feels right, what matters long-term, begins to drown out the external noise of judgment, critique, or praise. They stop shrinking themselves to fit a room. They stop over-explaining. They stop performing. And in that space, a subtle but profound energy begins to emerge. Their presence becomes more grounded, more magnetic, without them even trying. People notice. Some are drawn to it. Some are unsettled by it. Some try to pull them back into the old patterns, the old games of approval. But intelligent people simply observe. They understand that reactions reveal more about others than they do about them. Approval becomes irrelevant. It no longer drives decisions, dictates behavior, or fragments energy. And here's where it gets complicated, and where most people are not ready to follow. Because the moment you stop caring about approval, something deeper stirs inside. It's uncomfortable, almost like a quiet alarm going off in the mind. Suddenly, all the relationships built on convenience, all the conversations fueled by habit rather than truth, all the roles you've been playing without noticing, start to feel hollow. The very patterns that kept you safe now feel like chains. And for a mind tuned to clarity, this emptiness is impossible to ignore. Intelligent people begin to feel the weight of responsibility in a way that approval-seeking minds never do. Because approval shields you from yourself. It gives you excuses. I can't risk this because they might judge me, or I'll just wait until it's safe. Once approval is gone, there's no buffer. Every choice is yours. Every failure is yours. Every success is yours. You are fully accountable for yourself, your thoughts, your actions, and your energy. And this is where most people recoil. Most people panic when faced with that kind of freedom, because freedom without validation is terrifying. But intelligent people lean in. They sit with it. They reflect. They experiment. They see how far they can push themselves when they are no longer controlled by social expectation. And in that moment, something incredible begins to happen. Decisions become faster. Thinking becomes sharper. Life begins to feel lighter, almost as if a fog has lifted. But here's the part that nobody warns you about. The moment you realize that no longer needing approval doesn't just free your mind, it forces you to confront a truth you weren't prepared to see. Some people will resist this change. Some people will try to manipulate, shame, or punish you for no longer bending. Some will feel threatened by your clarity, intimidated by your independence, and confused by your calm. And in that moment, you realize that freedom comes at a cost. The world doesn't simply reward people for being aligned with themselves. The world reacts. And how it reacts will challenge everything you thought you knew about relationships, influence, and even your own courage. What happens next will determine whether you stay anchored to yourself or slip back into the patterns that everyone else depends on. And that moment is coming sooner than most people expect. Once you step off the treadmill of approval, life suddenly feels both lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter, because you're no longer carrying everyone else's expectations as if they were your own. Heavier, because there's no one left to blame, no invisible safety net of approval. and no external applause to guide your steps. Most people never notice this double-edged truth because they never step off that treadmill. But intelligent people do, and the first shock is always the same. Freedom feels terrifying. Suddenly every decision is raw, immediate, and entirely theirs. They can't hedge their bets on how someone will respond. They can't filter their words to avoid disapproval. And they can't outsource responsibility for their choices to a crowd. Every action must pass through their internal compass. And that's when true clarity begins. They start noticing patterns they could never see before. How approval shapes behavior, how fear masquerades as caution, and how most social interactions are designed to maintain comfort rather than foster growth. They observe how people unconsciously adjust their thoughts, opinions, and even personalities to fit in, to be liked, to avoid conflict. And the intelligent mind sees the cost immediately: fragmented focus, diluted thinking, stifled creativity, and invisible chains around personal potential. Once this awareness hits, they begin to experiment. What happens if I speak honestly without seeking nods of approval? What happens if I act decisively without waiting for validation? What happens if I stop performing entirely and simply exist aligned with my own principles? And the results are immediate and undeniable. Their mental energy surges. Their intuition sharpens. They start making choices with a speed and precision that feels almost unfair to those still trapped by social approval. People start noticing the change too. Some are drawn in by it. Others recoil. Some try to control it, to pull the intelligent person back into patterns of dependence on praise and reassurance. But it doesn't work. Because once you've tasted that kind of freedom, going back isn't an option. But here's where it becomes even more profound and also unsettling. When you stop caring about approval, you begin to see the world differently. Conversations that once seemed harmless now feel performative. Relationships that once felt supportive now feel transactional. The roles you've been playing, sometimes for years without realizing it, suddenly reveal themselves as restrictions rather than choices. And intelligent people feel this immediately. They realize that many of the people they trusted were not there for them. They were there for what they could provide: reassurance, entertainment, affirmation. And this is uncomfortable because it forces a choice. Continue performing for others at the cost of clarity and energy, or step fully into your own life and face the reactions that will inevitably come. This is where the gap between intelligence and wisdom becomes visible. Intelligence allows you to see the patterns, to notice the traps, to identify the cost of seeking approval. Wisdom, however, is choosing to act despite discomfort, knowing that short-term friction is required for long-term alignment. And when they make that choice, life begins to respond in ways that are both predictable and unpredictable. Predictable because energy aligned internally attracts clarity, focus, and progress. Unpredictable because people aren't used to someone moving independently. Some become curious, some try to manipulate, some resent the change. And here comes the dangerous, thrilling truth. The moment you fully stop needing approval, you become unpredictable. Not loud, not dramatic, just unpredictable. You stop being available for manipulation, control, or emotional negotiation. You stop bending, filtering, and performing. And this unpredictability forces a reaction in the world, a reaction that will reveal more about the people around you than you ever wanted to know. It's fascinating, it's uncomfortable, and it's unavoidable. And what happens next will push you further than you've ever been willing to go, because it will confront you with a decision that almost everyone fears, but that intelligent people cannot ignore. The moment you truly stop caring about social approval, something strange begins to happen inside. At first it feels like a void, because for so long approval has acted as a buffer, a shield against responsibility, against judgment, even against your own fear. Once it's gone, you're fully exposed. Every decision, every thought, every desire is yours alone, and there's no safety net to hide behind. Most people panic at this stage. They scramble to find reassurance, to recreate the familiar chains of validation. But intelligent people sit with it. They lean into it. They feel the weight of their own autonomy, and they begin to realize something extraordinary. The very absence of approval awakens clarity that was impossible to access while chasing applause. Suddenly, you see your relationships in high definition. You notice which ones were conditional, which ones were transactional, which ones thrived on convenience rather than connection. You see which conversations were real and which were performative, which people were drawn to you for who you are, and which were drawn to the version of you that served them. And that realization is both liberating and painful, because it forces you to make choices that most people avoid. You can't ignore it. You can't soften it. You can't pretend anymore. You must act. And every action now comes with a new kind of consequence. Intelligent people understand that this is the crucible in which true self-respect is forged. They know that bending for approval weakens their internal authority, and internal authority is the foundation of clarity, creativity, and progress. They begin to make decisions based solely on alignment, not reaction. They begin to trust their judgment instead of consensus. They stop over-explaining themselves, stop defending their choices, and stop worrying about misunderstandings. And as this happens, a strange, almost magnetic energy starts to appear around them. People notice the calm decisiveness, the unshakable presence, the quiet power. Some are drawn to it, sensing safety and clarity. Others are threatened by it, unconsciously realizing that they themselves are tethered to approval and that the intelligent person has broken free. And this is where the real challenge begins, because once you operate from internal alignment, the world stops responding in predictable ways. It tests you. It tries to pull you back into old patterns of dependence. It challenges your courage, your patience, and your focus. But intelligent people have already seen the trap. Approval was never giving them safety. It was only keeping them small. Now every reaction from the outside is just data, and every decision comes from a place of internal truth. And yet, even with this clarity, the next step is far more intense. Because when you stop bending for approval, you are forced to confront a question that most people avoid at all costs. If you are fully responsible for yourself, fully aligned with your principles, and fully independent of others' opinions, what are you actually going to do with that freedom? And the answer will define everything that follows. Once you step fully into the life of someone who doesn't need approval, everything changes, slowly at first, and then all at once. Decisions become sharper because they no longer need validation. Energy, once scattered across countless imagined judgments, is now concentrated entirely on what matters. Every action feels lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because there's no performance, no explanation, no editing of thoughts to fit others' expectations. Heavier because every choice is entirely yours, with no one to blame if it doesn't work out. Intelligent people notice patterns others can't. They notice how most people's lives are like elaborate stage plays, orchestrated entirely to secure nods, smiles, likes, and fleeting approval. They see how much of human energy is spent negotiating worth instead of creating, building, or thinking clearly. And as this realization sinks in, they understand that being approval-free doesn't just change the way they act. It changes the way the world interacts with them. People test them. They try to pull them back into old patterns. Some resent their independence. Some are curious. Some are intimidated. Some unconsciously feel smaller, like a mirror reflecting their own dependence on validation. And intelligent people respond differently. They don't react emotionally. They don't justify. They don't explain. They simply move according to their own internal compass, letting the reactions of others reveal more about them than about the intelligent person. This creates a tension in social dynamics that most people cannot handle. The people who once offered support may drift away. The relationships built on convenience may dissolve. And this is uncomfortable because even though freedom feels powerful, it also feels isolating. Intelligent people feel that isolation as a sign of alignment, not a problem to solve. It's a filter that separates superficial connections from genuine ones. And in that space, something rare begins to emerge, a clarity that is almost frightening in its intensity. Decisions that once felt like they required months of overthinking now crystallize in seconds. Actions that once needed approval, rehearsal, and validation now happen naturally. Life moves faster, sharper, and in ways that seem unfair to those still bound by social expectation. And yet even in this newfound freedom, an invisible tension begins to build. Because the moment you stop seeking approval, you realize the world doesn't simply fall into place. In fact, it often reacts unpredictably, sometimes unkindly, sometimes with silent pressure, and sometimes by forcing you into situations that test every ounce of your focus, courage, and self-trust. And this is where most people give up. They step back. They compromise. They start performing again, But intelligent people do the opposite. They lean into it. They embrace the challenge, knowing that this tension is not a threat but the final test of alignment. And just as everything seems stable, clear, and flowing, something happens that changes everything again. Something that will force them to make a decision no one else will ever understand. A decision that could either unlock their full potential or shake them to the core. And what comes next is a truth almost nobody ever talks about. But once you see it, you can't unsee it, and it will change the way you move through life forever. This is the point where everything converges, where the freedom from approval stops being a theory and becomes the way life actually moves through you. The moment you no longer need validation, everything becomes clearer, sharper, and heavier with purpose. Intelligent people begin to notice that the world responds differently to them, not because they demand attention, but because they are no longer distracted by the need to perform. They move with internal authority that is invisible yet undeniable. People start treating them differently. Some are drawn in, sensing confidence without ego, calm without detachment, power without threat. Others resist, consciously or unconsciously testing limits, trying to pull them back into old patterns of dependence. But intelligent people no longer respond to these tests with fear, anger, or pleading. They observe. They analyze. They continue moving according to their own principles. And this is where influence begins to emerge naturally. Not because they seek it, not because they perform for it, but because presence grounded in truth and clarity resonates with people in a way that imitation never can. Every decision they make, every path they walk, is free of compromise, free of distraction, and free of the invisible chains that once held them hostage to social expectation. The most profound transformation, however, is internal. The mind becomes faster, the intuition sharper, the focus deeper. Fear loses its power because fear thrives on external judgment, and judgment no longer matters. They are no longer swayed by praise, distracted by criticism, or defined by attention. Every ounce of energy, once diluted by the need to be liked, is now concentrated entirely on growth, creation, and aligned action. And here's the revelation that changes everything. Once you stop bending to approval, life itself begins to bend toward clarity. Opportunities appear not because of popularity, not because of luck, but because you are acting consistently, decisively, and in alignment with your true potential. And in that alignment, intelligent people discover the most extraordinary truth of all. The world reacts to presence, to integrity, and to self-alignment in ways that no approval-seeking effort could ever manufacture. They realize that their influence, their energy, and their clarity are now unstoppable, because they no longer need anyone to validate them to feel whole. They are free, and in this freedom a choice arises, the choice to continue shrinking for comfort, to return to the familiar chains of approval, or to step fully into the life that only those willing to let go of external validation can ever experience. This is the final threshold, the one that separates the majority from the extraordinary, the moment where fear, uncertainty, and expectation collide, and the only way forward is to trust yourself completely, to act decisively, and to embrace the reality that living free from approval is not just a mindset. It is the path to a life so aligned, so magnetic, and so powerful that the world cannot ignore it. If this resonated with you, if you felt the weight of what it means to stop seeking approval and start living aligned, thank you for watching until the end. Like and subscribe, because this journey doesn't end here, and there's so much more clarity and wisdom waiting for those ready to step fully into themselves.